Hi guys, welcome back, and today I'll be doing the next part for What If Goku Was in the MCU. Now, last time we left off, which was a while ago, I do apologise, we covered the events of the first Avengers movie, and more recently, we had a redo of part 1 and 2, where some bits changed and I made it much more bite-sized for people to watch. However, this time this bit isn't going to be bite-sized, and I hope everyone's looking forward to it. Now, let's get going. I've got a large bit to cover, so I've got to go. Now, first off, I want to cover just a little bit of Lee slash Goku's social life. If you weren't here to watch part 1 and 2 redone, I've changed his name from Michael to Lee. It's going to be slightly confusing, but it's more in honoration of Stan Lee than anything. Now, his social life, which is something he really doesn't have outside of S.H.I.E.L.D. and the Avengers, and thanks to this, he doesn't really have any friends his age. This is because he had to spend a lot of time doing hero training throughout most of his teen years, so he didn't make any close friends, which isn't to say he was unpopular in high school. He was quite the opposite, actually. He was very popular thanks to his caring and laid back attitude, while also being superhuman, allowing him to do amazing at sports and most physical activities. Then to top it off, he's a huge comic book, superhero, and movie nerd, meaning he fit in with most crowds. However, he never made any true friends. And the Avengers, who are his co-workers, are the only real friends he has. Outside of his hero life, well, he doesn't really have anything except for his family, and even then, he doesn't see them too much anymore. Being a bit older, he spends a lot more time at Avengers HQ doing some training with Steve, or just hanging around, seeing the city a bit. So he doesn't see them as much. We see our hero next in the Quinjet as Cap briefs him on a mission. The fighter looks excited, and Natasha gives him a look. The pair share a nod as slowly they get closer to this facility. We soon see Lee parachute out of the Quinjet, heading straight towards it. We then see the opening of Captain America the Winter Soldier movie play out. There are some small changes here, like Lee being present. This makes the mission a lot easier, and also we get a good look at Lee rocking his new outfit and looking a good bit older. And thanks so much for the amazing work, Serenity. I will have her description, and probably I've butchered her name, right here and in the description as well. With the mission being completed faster, like I said, thanks to Lee being present, he's able to deal with some of the goons a bit faster. And also thanks to Cap having spent some time training with the boy, it's caused him to have some small increases here and there, so he's just a bit more of a proficient fighter. Like that, the mission's completed a bit easier, and Lee heads back home. He's heading home just to spend a bit of time with his family. After all, he hasn't seen them in a while, and because of this, his involvement in the rest of the film is very minimal. He and Clint do both catch wind of what's happening, hearing about Fury's death and what's happening with Cap before the news ever hits, and this leads to them trying to figure out what's going on from the outside. After all, they're trying to figure out what's happening from their own home and can't get in contact with Natasha or Cap or anyone. They do try calling up some others, but they don't know anything as well. So they do their best to keep up with what's happening, and eventually the rest of the film plays out like canon, with the small exception that Cap is a bit stronger. I think that will change the course of the movie dramatically. Now, with that all being said, let's get to going to the meat and potatoes of this. The Avengers have been working together for years, trying to locate Loki's scepter. After S.H.I.E.L.D. was crashed, they're trying to find the last few bits of Hydra which have taken the scepter. With a little bit of luck, the team is currently rushing towards a Hydra base in promise that the scepter might be there. Now, we see our sixth shot of our heroes rushing into battle, where we see a certain monkey boy flying himself in. See, over the last few years, the Avengers have done lots of missions together. Not all of them have gone to plan as well. During one mission, Clint found himself falling from a great height. Of course, Tony was en route to catch him, but someone beat him to it. Lee, seeing his father figure falling to his possible death, made a jump towards him, much like he did for Tony in the Avengers movie. However, here, something almost instinctive kicks in. Lee feels a massive surge of energy flow through him as he suddenly moves faster than ever expected. After feeling this surge of energy, he catches his father. The boy suddenly starts to realize that he's flying, but just as he has that thought, he feels heavily drained and falls to the floor. But he managed to get his father pretty close. Having used this flight technique, he feels drained and tired just from that short distance. It even causes him to pass out. Of course, the mission is complete easily afterwards, and once that is done, he spends time working on this ability. Tony gives him some pointers on how to fly, and it slowly leads to him learning to do it pretty effectively. Using it is still pretty draining on the boy, and he can only really use it in short bursts, but he can use it. Now, back to the mission at hand, the group fight well, easily powering through the Hydra soldiers in front of them. Tony starts slowly getting into the base itself, where things go normal, Tony being the only one in the base, leading to Pietro and Wanda being released like normal. Pair get up to their normal grief, with Clint getting hit and his arrow being stopped. Of course, the speedster has to be a bit cocky, but what he didn't account for is Lee catching what happened to his father. He's already heading towards him to help, and that's where he catches a good glimpse of the speedster. Lee says to Natasha how he's going after him, but quickly loses sight. He does want to go after the speedster, but has lost sight and doesn't really know where to check, so he decides to help Natasha get his father to safety. After the Hulk deals with the bunker in front of them, Goku catches a slight glimpse of something. He takes a guess and starts running off in a direction. Natasha's a bit confused, but leaves him to it. The boy grabs hold of his power pole and clicks a button. It begins to extend. This was a small present from Tony, just something he got at some point over time. As the pole begins to extend, it trips over the blur, where Lee gets a good look at the speedster. The pair make eye contact, and Lee shouts out, "Not fast enough, I guess." Pietro looks at the Avenger and takes a fighting stance. Lee copies. Pietro rushes towards the Avenger, throwing some fast punches, faster than he can even understand. Each hit hurts a lot, but Lee isn't willing to take them all head on. Just before Pietro can manage to escape, Lee manages to catch one of his arms with a bit of a luck. He charges back up one punch and throws it directly into the speedster's chest. The enhanced gets flying away as Lee says that was for my dad, while trying to catch his breath after being hit so many times. Pietro slowly pulls himself back up and the pair get ready to go again, however this time he calls a quits and leaves the area. He's very confused at what just happened, but he decides to leave it for now. As this part of the movie plays out pretty normal, Wanda fucks with Tony's mind, and they eventually get the scepter and head back to their HQ. There are some small changes here and there, like Lee picking on his father a bit for getting hit, and also wanting to get filled in with Cap about the Maximoff twins. Hearing what happened to them and what their life was like, he feels bad for them and wants to help them. Then the final change comes when Ultron checks out the Avenger files he has, finding out that Lee is from alien heritage that no one knows about, and also learns that the Avenger doesn't know himself to be an alien. He thinks this could be useful to know, but decides to keep it to himself for now. Now, after the party ends and they're all talking with one another, people start trying to lift Mjolnir. Things go mostly normal, with Lee stepping up to the plate after Natasha declines her attempt. He gets his hands gripped onto the handle. Just before he can pull up, Ultron enters the room. Like normal, he gives his normal speech. Everyone watches as they slowly get defensive, and then the drones attack, much like normal. Everyone's scattered a bit, and Lee catches one of the drones escaping with the scepter. Not wanting to let the last few years of searching for it go to waste, he quickly jumps out of the window after the robot, and a high-speed chase begins to happen throughout the city. Goku desperately tries to catch up with the robot, however, he's having a hard time even keeping up with him. This is still fairly new to Lee, and he's not quite confident with it yet. The robot is slowly making good ground on him, and Lee thinks to himself how he's going to have to cut it off. He sees a way to do it and apologizes out loud as he suddenly takes a turn and starts cutting through different streets. Eventually, he sees a nearby building in front of him, puts his arms up and rockets through it. The robot, thinking he had lost Lee, takes a look behind and then gets hit hard by Lee, flying full speed through a building. The Avenger only takes a few seconds to grab hold of the robot as the pair begin to throw hands at one another while in the air. Lee is desperately trying to get this scepter back. With a bit of luck, he manages to destroy it pretty easily and then grabs hold of the scepter. But he's drained heavily after this chase, so he lands on top of a building and takes some time catching his breath. The other Avengers are pretty worried about what happened to Lee as they call him. The fighter answers saying how he's fine and even got the scepter. The group are relieved, and while Lee is catching his breath, Tony and Banner explain who Ultron is and what he's there for. Of course, this explanation goes pretty normal. There's some changes though. Thanks to the fact that the scepter is still in their possession, the group are a lot calmer. Of course, Thor is still very pissed off, and he still goes to grab Tony, which just makes things go pretty normal. Thanks to Lee not being here, he can't change how things are playing out. The explanation is made of what Ultron is, and everyone starts trying to figure out what the next move is. Soon, Lee arrives with the scepter, and everyone is pretty happy to see that he's okay and has it. The best the robot managed to do to him was get one pretty good punch on the face, but he didn't even really feel it. Now, the next part of this movie is going to play out wildly different, and this is thanks to the fact that the group have the scepter, which means they actually have the Mind Stone. Now, with Ultron still thinking that he needs to make his upgrade, but he also now has to come up with a plan on how to get the scepter. He knows that he will need it, and then he decides that he will also need the help from Wanda and Pietro. So their recruitment goes like normal. Now, things start to play out pretty similar, but there's some changes with the Avengers. First of all, Lee is making sure that the peace is kept. He's always played the role of making sure everyone doesn't kill each other. After all, they're all his heroes and looks up to all of them, so he doesn't want any of them to fall out and wants to try and keep the team's chemistry as best as he can. Thanks to everyone liking Lee, it tends to lead to him being able to keep everything calm, and this tends to make him have sort of a pseudo leader role. Of course, Cap is still the leader, and Tony still pays for everything, but Lee is the peacekeeper, so it helps a lot. And while this is also happening, they're trying to figure out what to do with the scepter. It's pretty difficult to figure out. Thor wants to take it back to Asgard, but Tony thinks that they might need to study it to get a better idea of where Ultron will be and how to find him. Also, Tony still wants to have another attempt at Ultron, but he doesn't vocalize this right now, knowing that the only person he should really talk to it about is Banner. He also wants to get a better idea of what this energy source is coming from, but for now can't think too much into it. Soon they figure out where Ultron's going, knowing it to be South Africa, knowing he wants vibranium. So they start heading that way, but leave the scepter back at Avengers Tower, hiding it somewhere in the building and telling Maria Hill to be on guard, and maybe even calling Rhodey and Sam if she needs some backup. She doesn't mind doing so, and soon the group arrive in South Africa. The initial part of this doesn't change up too much, keep in mind that Ultron has still recruited Wanda and Pietro, so that hasn't changed too much there. Big change comes from is when the fight breaks out. In this bit here, Lee calls dibs on fighting the speedster. However, he isn't really out to fight him. Lee chases off after Pietro, looking for him desperately, while Wanda starts sneaking around and causing some problems. Eventually, Lee manages to catch up with Pietro. The pair lock eyes, getting ready to fight, when Lee asks why he's doing this. To believe, Pedro says he wants to destroy the Avengers, and more importantly, Tony Stark. Lee sighs a bit and explains that Tony isn't the same person he used to be. He understands what happened to them is dreadful, but he wants to help. Pedro's annoyed and says how he doesn't care how much he's changed. He's still the reason their family is dead. Lee says how he understands that, and he can never understand the pain that they must feel. He was lucky enough to have never lost any family, and all the people close to him are pretty strong and can defend themselves, and he comes from a safe place. But he wants to help them. Destroying, killing, it won't bring them back, and eventually will just leave them feeling empty. And it wouldn't be what their parents wanted. The parents just would have wanted them to live on and have a good life. He wants to offer them a chance to put everything they've done in the past. He wants to offer them a chance to leave this life they're setting themselves up into with Ultron. Explains how Ultron is probably only using them now while he needs them, and might not have a purpose for them much longer. He's seen bad guys do things like this before, and he knows how it ends for the sidekicks. Pedro's generally caught off guard, as Lee has taken everything down. He's no longer got his hands ready to fight, his stance is very passive, and his just atmosphere feels different. There's still a fight going on around them, but for this second, everything seems pretty peaceful from Lee's perspective. Pedro thinks on what he had just been offered, sits on it for a few seconds, catching the sight of his sister in the background. Not thinking too much of it, soon he sees Wanda. He gives her a signal to enter his mind. Wanda does so, and she starts to feel what Goku feels. He's relatively shocked to feel that he's being genuine, having caught some of the conversation, but she then is very scared. She finds something deep within him, and she doesn't want to see it anymore. Doing something, putting Goku in a trace in his own mind, much like she had done to the others, she warns Pietro of what just happened, as the battle from here continues pretty normal. But what Goku experiences is nothing like what the others experience. Goku starts seeing somewhere he's never seen before, and he's seen a lot of the Earth over the last few years, but this is nothing like it. In fact, it's so different, he's convinced it might not even be on the planet. He can't figure out what's going on. He hears people screaming and people running around, and catches sight of people wearing armour, and what looks to be Atari, and he even sees a Leviathan. He's now completely confused and doesn't know what's going on. Soon, two people run into the building he's in, pick him up, and then rush off, screaming out of a female's heard saying, "We need to get Kakarot off the planet." Male responds, shouting out that he knows. They just need to get him to the pod they've already got prepared. Hopefully, they don't run into any trouble. The pair run for a few seconds before jumping up and flying off. Goku can feel a speed he's never felt before and is so confused at what's happening. As he looks around, he catches a Leviathan chasing after them. The male shouts out to the female to take Kakarot quickly, as Lee feels him get moved from one person to another, and he catches sight of the person who was just carrying him. They have very similar hair, and he has a tail. He's never been so confused. The person who just released him puts his hands together and fires off what looks to be a massive beam. It completely cuts through the Shatare as Lee watches on, even more confused. He really doesn't know what's happening anymore. Seeing this happen, he watches as the man catches back up with them, and they soon arrive at what looks to be some sort of orb. He feels himself be placed. But instead of sitting from the inside of the pod, Lee gets his own physical body back and watches from the outside. He sees that the person he's just watching from was himself as a baby. He doesn't understand what's happening anymore and is just kind of in a state of shock. The people who were just carrying him look on through the pod door, but before else can happen, he feels himself wake up and he's back inside the ship. Asks if he's alright, trying to figure out what happened as Lee grabs his head, starting to feel some sort of massive headache. Barton runs over checking on his son, who upon being touched jumps back away from Barton, just staring at him. This shocks everyone, but Lee just sits there for a few seconds, and slowly everyone is loaded into the Quinjet. This is after Hulk's battle with Veronica, and the fight is mostly the same. Now, the flight to where they're heading is silent, as Lee sits alone thinking to himself, replaying what he saw over and over and over again in his mind, trying to figure out what it was, or if it was real. Soon the group arrive at the Barton home, where Laura is happy to see Clint and Lee. However, the younger of the two is quiet and distant. Even when his little brother and sister, who he loves a lot, show up, he doesn't change. The group understand whatever he was shown has shaken him to the core, and they need to try and snap him out of it. It starts to play out a tiny bit like canon, with Thor heading off to the Water of Sight, I think that's what it's called, and things go normal there. Tony, instead of sitting around, decides to head off and check on the scepter, with it still being fine, and also he starts digging around trying to figure out who's stopping Ultron from accessing nuclear codes, which happens in a slightly different way than canon, but is mostly the same. And everyone else stays at the Barton home. Now, the major change comes with Pietro. You see, after his talk with Lee, he decided to dig around. He got anxious from sitting around. After a small bit of digging, he has found out what Ultron's plan is, seeing how it's to drop Sokovia and kill the entire world. He obviously doesn't want to allow this to happen, and soon he fills in his sister. And when she's warned, she doesn't quite believe him. But after a quick check through Petro's mind, she learns that he is telling the truth. The pair know that they need to get the Avengers in, but aren't sure how. So they start planning, and soon they sneak away from the likes of Ultron. It causes a bit of trouble. After all, they do have to fight one or two droids on the way out. But after they escape, Pedro runs them towards a nearby city, starts causing some minor problems. Things that would get their names in the news, but of course, nothing that would cause them to get two heavy hitters in. With the group catching wind of what's happening, all of them respond. Even Lee, who has been in a slump for a while now, gets up to answer the call. With everyone grouping up in the city where they are ready to fight, but are surprised when Pietro and Wanda surrender themselves. Everyone stands down a bit, but Lee still has a very enraged look in his eye. He's shaken and angry as he stares down Wanda. He's about to scream something when Pietro cuts him off, saying, "They need his help, as Ultron plans to kill all of us." Hearing this, the faces of our heroes drop, as they lead the Maximoffs into the Quinjet, where they hear the plan of Ultron to drop Sokovia. After hearing it, the Avengers know they need to stop it, with Lee being the one to say how they need to get hold of Tony and Thor. These being the first words he said to anyone, and this catches them off guard. They don't want to waste any time, as the group head towards the Avenger Tower, where Thor went after visiting the pool. And having filled Tony in a bit about the Infinity Stones, the pair are a little bit more in the loop. Now, with the preparation for the battle in Sokovia goes mostly normal. One slight change is here, and I'm sure it's pretty obvious. We're down a vision, and of course that was their main counter to Ultron. But luckily, like normal, Tony has a plan, and he has put Jarvis back together. He believes that if he can get Jarvis into Ultron's system, Jarvis will be more than enough to shut him off the internet, and that's their best plan. So Tony starts working on a way to do so. But Lee also makes a suggestion of, if this doesn't work, maybe shutting the internet down just for a few seconds while they destroy Ultron. This could be their backup plan, and Tony's pretty proud of the kid for coming up with something so smart. Now, after getting everything ready, Tony shows off the pair of gloves he made, explaining how Jarvis is inside of these, and what everyone needs to do, whoever's wearing them, needs to grab onto Ultron and hold on as long as possible. Jarvis will infiltrate his systems, and it should only take a minute or two for him to shut down Ultron's systems, but they can't release, it has to be a full minute unbroken. At first, Cap is going to take the gloves, but Lee steps up saying how he is stronger and will have a better grip, so he will take it. However, Cap responds saying his head isn't in the right place right now. He won't argue with the kid, and he will be taking the gloves. Lee's annoyed as everyone starts to load up into the Quinjet. As the team head towards Sokovia, Lee is sitting silently once again. Barton gets a bit annoyed and goes to check on his son, asking what's on his mind. Lee stays quiet for a little bit, but Barton keeps pushing, eventually getting his son to snap, with him saying, "I know I'm not your son." Everyone in the Quinjet hears this, and everyone goes silent, as Lee goes on shouting, "Why didn't you tell me?" Barton responds saying how he never found the right time and didn't think it mattered, but Lee looks unamused by this answer, as he responds with, "Then why not tell me about the fact I'm not human? Or was it not a good time for that either?" Makes Clint's face turn white, as the Avengers realise that the boy figured it out, but Thor is the only one who looks confused, thinking to himself, did he not know what he was? He can say anything though. Clint speaks up saying how they didn't know what to tell him, or they didn't know what he was, so they didn't want to scare him, or even upset him. So they stayed quiet. They planned on telling him the moment they figured it out. For a moment takes this as an answer, but then realises that he used the word they. As he takes a scan around the room, he can see that all the Avengers are looking away. They all knew he was an alien, and this makes him more pissed off than ever, realising that everyone knew about it but him. Before anything else can happen though, Tony announces that they are there. This causes the argument to stop as everyone gets into hero mode. The first to leave is Lee as he begins the evacuation of Sokovia. This goes like normal, but they get a few more people out thanks to there being a few more people here. Remember, Natasha and Hulk weren't here originally, so it's pretty easy here. Now, things start to play out like normal as well. Since Ultron didn't waste time making a body, things are playing out about the normal, just a few hours ahead. Now, Sokovia starts flying, hundreds of Ultron droids start attacking, and the workload is a bit easier with Lee, who can hold off multiple droids at once. Lee takes the position of Cap, making sure people are safe near the bridge. He's able to stop the car from falling a lot easier, and Thor only needs to bring the one car up. Small change, but just something to point out that, in fact, Lee is stronger than Cap. Now, as for Cap, he's headed towards Ultron with Tony, where they hope to shut him off from escaping. The pair work together and are able to keep up with the newly empowered Ultron, who is soon catched by Steve. Steve holds on for dear life, trying to squeeze on for as long as possible. He manages to get 20 seconds before Ultron realizes what's happening and flings him away. With Ultron having caught on with what their plan is, he's pretty amused and starts his best trying to avoid Steve. It's a hard task, and every now and again Steve will get hold of him, but it's nothing major. The captain realizes that maybe Lee was the better option for this, starts trying to fight even harder. A pair of Tony and Cap come off one another quite well, and they are holding their own fairly decently. Now, things on Sokovia are playing out pretty similarly, with not a lot of changes here, with some minor exceptions. With Wanda, she's still a bit freaked out about fighting. However, the speech Clint would give would be slightly different. Clint is clearly upset at this point. Him and his son have just had probably one of their biggest arguments ever, and he really feels like he's hurt him. His mind is elsewhere. Of course, he would probably give somewhat of a similar speech, but it would probably be a bit less jokey. He would also say that they all have one another's backs. And Clint, after finishing it, goes off and fights some more droids. Of course, Wanda eventually is invigorated and goes help. That does make things somewhat easier. Of course, things start to play out a little bit more like canon, with the helicarrier showing up thanks to Fury, who was a bit more quiet throughout the movie, and this leads to civilians being evacuated. Once civilians are completely evacuated, Tony and Cap call in for help. After all, there's a massive fight going on and they can't hold off Ultron forever. He's also soon going to pull down this island and they aren't sure what to do. So, like normal, all the Avengers would respond to this call while War Machine defends Helicarrier, which is a bit of a harder task since Ultron isn't down from the internet yet, so he could probably put up a bit of a fight against it, but they're able to hold their own pretty well. Now, with this being said, the Avengers fight against Ultron and his hundreds and hundreds of droids while defending the Switch might be slightly different. After all, Ultron, like I said, is still connected and has a backdoor escape. During the fight, the group decide that they need to get hold of him. Lee shouts out for Cap to give him the gloves. He's unsure but can see that Lee is in the game right now, so he quickly takes them off and chucks them towards Lee. A droid tries to intercept, but with a bit of help from Pietro, it quickly and easily gets to Lee, even putting them on for him. He thanks Pietro, who gives him a bit of a nod, as Lee then flies off towards Ultron, grabbing hold of his head. Before Ultron can really pick up on it, he's soon being hacked by Jarvis, being able to feel him in his head, picking away at things. Of course, Ultron tries to fight back, but is in a losing match. He also goes to overpower Lee, but Lee is far too strong for him, as he's easily keeping a grasp onto Ultron. Ultron goes for the next best thing as he tries to share any information about Lee he has, trying to think of a way to get this kid to at least ungrip him a slight bit, how he's adopted or how he's an alien, trying anything he can. The thing which almost works is sharing where his ship is. It causes Lee to flinch a little bit and release the grip for one arm, but he remembers what's happening and remembers to grip on as hard as he possibly can. Now he has no time to make things personal, and he can't let his emotions overthrow the fact that this guy's trying to end the world. A minute and a half passes and Tony screams out that it's been long enough. Lee thanks God as he squeezes down as hard as he can on Ultron's head. It doesn't quite destroy it, but he gets a good smash in on it. He then kicks Ultron away as Tony flies in and repulsor blasts him, doing a good chunk of damage to him. The robot is sent flying away and presumably destroyed. Well, presumably. The group continue their fight against the droids and eventually Wanda offers to stay and guard the switch until the island is completely evacuated. Of course, things here play out slightly normal, but there's a change with Pietro. You see, after seeing everything that's happening with Lee and Clint, he decides he's going to step in a little bit. He explains to the Avenger, who isn't really up for talking right now, saying how Lee is lucky to have a family who care about him, that are even blood related. Pietro has no one but his sister, and he can tell that Clint genuinely cares for him. Maybe he was in the wrong for not telling him, and maybe he should have known since he was a kid. But it doesn't matter if he's alien or not. the guy still genuinely loves him. And if he needs to learn more about his heritage, he's more than willing to convince Wanda to show him as much as she can. It won't be an easy process, but willing to help Lee because Lee was one of the few people to offer a hand to help him. Lee thanks Pietro and decides that he'll sit on it, but for now they need to evacuate everyone up here. So, with that being said, things start to play out like normal. Ultron, having luckily survived, manages to get into a Quinjet where he starts unloading cannon fire. Of course, this leads to Clint almost being shot at, Pietro getting in the way and moving Clint and the child out of the way, sort of coming to terms with death. But he just hears tink, 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 and the sound of bullets hitting the floor. As he looks up, he sees Lee standing in front of him. The kid holds a cocky smile as he says, "Are you not bulletproof?" He chuckles to himself a tiny bit, and Pedro looks kind of annoyed but laughs himself. Clint runs over to his son, checking he's alright, and at first Lee's a bit reluctant, but he asks his father if he's alright. They share a bit of a nod, and knowing that there's going to be a bit of an awkward road coming up, but they decide to get through it together. With that said, Clint gets off the island, and Natasha's dropped off by the Hulk like normal, who quickly deals with Ultron's main body. Luckily, with Quicksilver surviving, thank fuck, you know, the guy who could dodge bullets earlier in the movie, he leads to Wanda not going into that rage and leaving her post, meaning she stands by her post. Instead of her wandering off to find Ultron, Lee actually goes off to finish the job for them. Hulk still flies off into the sunset magically, and the group quickly finish off the rest of the droids. Tony comes up with a way to destroy the island, and it's a lot like normal. This time he plans to do it from a higher height, where he and Thor have a higher chance of escaping. Of course, Thor's happily to do so. After a quick perimeter sweep of the whole island by Pietro, pretty sure that no Ultron drones are working or operational, so they decide to evacuate completely. With Quicksilver doing one last sweep to check for civilians, Lee offers to go grab his sister. Pietro's more than happy to allow this to happen, as Lee saves Wanda away from the drop point. Quickly putting her in the ship, he goes back off to see what he can do to help. After all, he doesn't want to just sit around and do nothing. What the group failed to realise is that one droid was playing dead, right near the switch. Much like normal, it makes a slow crawl towards it, eventually leading to Sokovia being dropped. Of course, everyone begins to panic. There's only 3 people there, and Clint is already worried about Lee. Everyone watches as the group who are on the island start trying to think what to do. Tony tries to rush, but the island falling on him is slowing him down. But thanks to a bit of help from a third member, Lee flies down underneath the island and, kind of stupidly, grabs hold of it, trying to push it up, putting all of his strength into holding this island up. He shouts out for Tony to hurry this whole process up, as Tony thanks the kid who's slowing the descent a fair bit, but nothing dramatic, as Tony shoots into the core and soon shouts for Thor to blow it, which happens, and things happen here pretty normally. Lee's exhausted after exerting so much energy though, and gets a quick save from Tony or Thor, take your pick. Things would play out pretty normal, with a small change. Clint and Laura would have a sit down with Lee, where they explain everything they know about him, which isn't a lot. They explain how it seems whenever he takes a very serious injury, he seems to get stronger. He has these really weird attitudes on a full moon, and they don't really know what else to tell him. They don't know his race, and they feel bad for not telling him sooner. Of course, Lee's still very salty about this, and isn't quite ready to talk to them fully about it, but explains that maybe in a while, when he's settled down and done some of that mind practice thing with Wanda, he'll feel better and they can talk then. He still loves them and still wants to be a part of their family, but for now he just needs some time away. They understand and they tell him to visit whenever he's feeling ready. Clint feels the worst about this, but he knows that his son's only going to go be with the Avengers. Now, some things do play slightly different on the final day. With Thor walking out and Tony and Cap having the conversation, we do lose the conversation about, well, you know, the really funny, would the elevator go up or down with Mjolnir? Of course, that doesn't happen here with no vision. Something different does happen with Thor. On his way out, Thor says, "It's kind of funny, isn't it, that you, a Saiyan, just defended a planet." Lee looks really confused, as do Tony and Cap, with them asking, "A what?" Thor explains, "A Saiyan." He soon goes on to say, "That's what you are, Lee, a Saiyan." A pretty different one at that. Everyone is gobsmacked as they realise Thor knows what he is. Thor goes on to explain what a Saiyan is, explaining how it's a warrior race and they're actually pretty powerful. It's pretty weird to see one on Earth, actually. And Lee might be one of the weaker ones he's met. Thor goes on to give a bit of detail, explaining that the Saiyans were planet destroyers. Well, they were for a while. And then they met the Asgardians, and the Asgardians and the Saiyans loved one another. They enjoyed every moment they got to fight against one another. After all, an Asgardian was pretty much the best fight a Saiyan could get, and a Saiyan that beat an Asgardian was impressive enough. Not that it often happens, but there was this one guy in Legend, something about being super or something. Thor doesn't really care for the history of it. He's only ever fought one Saiyan, and he wasn't that interesting. And thinking about it, he realizes that he hasn't visited the planet in a while. Plans on making a trip there soon. Lee thanks Thor for this small bit of information and asks that if, when he visits, maybe he could be taken as well. Thor is more than happy to do so, saying how he'll stop by before he visits. And with that, Thor goes, with the still intent trying to figure out why all the Infinity Stones are showing up, but also now planning on visiting planet Vegeta. Lee, who's happy to have learnt something, says goodbye to Tony and thanks him for everything. He still very much likes the kid and tells him that he can always pop by for a visit and any cool items he wants, don't ask him for. Of course, Tony would make him for anything pretty much, but he's just having a laugh with the kid. Of course, Tony and Cap's goodbye doesn't change much. In fact, they might even end it on better terms since the arguments were a bit less, since Lee was always making peace. And soon, Natasha, Lee, and Cap get ready to train up the next generation of Avengers. Of course, most of the team is the same. Par Vision is replaced with Pietro, who would soon don the name Quicksilver. Of course, one final thing to cover would be Wanda's mind training with Lee. That is a story for the next part. And hopefully the next part should come sooner than later. I'm leaving it here so people can, one, have a fun idea of what's going to happen, even though I think it's fairly obvious. But also, just because this video is long. It's very long, I've got to edit a lot for right now. And I'm tired. I've been looking at this script for the better part of a week, and I've gone insane. I say the better part of a week. It's been like 4 months. I've been turning this script upside down, shaking it around. It's putting its left and right foot in. It's just been a really, really horrible time trying to get this script together. Finally got something I liked, and looking on it, I'm pretty happy with it. There's not a lot of changes here, but I have made some changes, and the issue with writing this what if, why there's such big breaks, I have to make a gamble between changing the story an awful lot and a minor bit and making it kind of pointless. So I could make major changes and make it so a whole new sort of timeline exists, and I can jump around and do this, and do that. Issue with that is it's no longer really the MCU story, it's more so uh, my crackpot dream. And my other issue is if I change too little, I feel like there's no point in having the story. I was pretty happy with how this went, to be fair. I managed to change up enough things like Vision not being in it, the Scepter, which I didn't mention, it does go back to Asgard. Um, and, things like this happen. Also, a bit of a lore drop. Also, having it so the whole Sokovia event was not as major as it could have possibly been. After all, the Avengers sort of kept their shit together, other than when Hulk, destroyed half of the city. But we look past that. Yeah, so that's sort of my issue writing this what if. Unlike Dragon Ball, where if I want to go off the rails, I just go off the rails, MCU is a bit different. I have to kind of remember that everything needs to sort of works with one another. And if I change something majorly, I'm gonna have to be very careful how I make the next step. Otherwise, we are no longer in the MCU. It's very stressful, I'm gonna say. And if anyone sat here and listened to me ramble on about this crap, thank you. I really appreciate it. First of all, and secondly, why? But yeah, yeah. Well, I don't really know what to say now. I think that's all I wanted to say. That's my little bit of a rant over with. I hope everyone enjoyed. I hope y'all have a good day or a good night, and hopefully I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening, guys, and sorry about the wait.